June 18, 1941. Toledo, Ohio, Willis Overland Motor Company. The pneumatic hammers hit like artillery fire at dawn. John Myers pressed his goggles tight against his face as sparks fountained from the assembly line, illuminating the cavernous factory floor in bursts of orange and white. The air tasted of hot metal and machine oil. Around him, 200 workers moved in synchronized chaos, welding, riveting, bolt gunning, each motion timed to the second. The noise was so constant, it became a kind of silence, broken only by the foreman's whistle and the clang of steel meeting steel. Myers wiped sweat from his brow despite the morning chill. He'd been a line supervisor for Ford back in '38, assembling deluxe sedans for families heading west. Now he built something else entirely. The vehicle taking shape before him had no doors, no roof, a flat hood, exposed engine, and a frame so stripped down it looked like a skeleton. The Army called it a general-purpose vehicle, GP for short. The men on the floor called it a Jeep. "Myers!" The plant manager, a thick-shouldered man named Garrison, strode across the concrete, clipboard in hand. "We're 20 units behind schedule. The War Department wants 500 by Friday." 500? Myers turned, incredulous. "We're barely hitting 350 a week." "Then we work faster." Garrison's voice had no room for negotiation. "They're shipping to Britain by the end of the month. If those boys don't get transport, they fight on foot." He leaned in close, lowering his voice beneath the hammer blows. "You hear about Pearl Harbor rumors?" Myers had. Everyone had. Whispers in the break room, newspaper headlines dancing around the truth. Japanese expansion in the Pacific. American embargoes. Diplomats in Washington playing chess while the board caught fire. "Rumors don't build jeeps," Myers said. "No, but wars do." Garrison tapped the clipboard. "Get it done." He walked away, leaving Myers staring at the skeletal vehicles rolling past. Each one identical. Each one destined for a battlefield he couldn't imagine. By noon, the line hit its rhythm. Myers moved through the stations, checking torque specs, verifying fuel line connections, ensuring every bolt seated flush. The workers didn't talk much. Didn't need to. The work spoke for itself. A chassis every 3 minutes, an engine drop every 5. Tires mounted, axles fitted, steering columns locked into place with the precision of watchmakers building tanks. At 1:47 p.m., the radio crackled to life in the break room. Myers was inspecting a transmission housing when he heard the shouting. Men dropping tools, running toward the static-filled voice of a newscaster whose words tumbled over themselves in frantic urgency. "Reports confirmed. Japanese aircraft. Pearl Harbor under attack." The factory floor went silent. Not the silence of concentration, but the silence of a world holding its breath. Myers stood frozen, wrench still in hand, as the voice continued. Battleships burning, hundreds dead, the Pacific Fleet crippled in a single morning. Around him, men stared at each other with expressions that ranged from shock to rage to something darker, inevitability. "Back to work." Garrison's voice cut through the stillness like a blade. He stood at the center of the floor, arms crossed, face carved from stone. "You heard me. Back to work." "They just bombed us," someone said. A younger man, maybe 22. "We're at war." "Which is exactly why you get back on that line." Garrison pointed toward the half-assembled jeeps stretching toward the far wall. "You want to hit back? Build. Every vehicle we finish is one more truck carrying ammunition, one more ride to the front, one more chance our boys come home. So move." Myers looked down at the wrench in his hand, then at the Jeep beside him, its engine still exposed, waiting for installation. He moved. The others followed. By midnight, the factory had produced 612 vehicles, a new record, and in the corner of the floor, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, Myers chalked a message onto the hood of a finished Jeep before it rolled toward the shipping dock. For Pearl. 7,000 miles away, in a windowless briefing room beneath Tokyo's Imperial General Staff headquarters, Commander Takeshi Yamamoto studied intelligence photographs spread across a mahogany table. Aerial reconnaissance, satellite reports, stolen manifests from American ports. His aide, Lieutenant Sato, stood at attention beside him. "Sir, the Americans have increased vehicle production by 300% in the last 6 months." Yamamoto didn't look up. "Expected. They always overproduce." "With respect, sir, these numbers suggest something beyond normal capacity. Our analysts estimate they may produce 50,000 light transport vehicles by early 1943. Now Yamamoto looked up. 50,000? Yes, sir. Yamamoto studied the photographs again. Factories, assembly lines, thousands of identical vehicles staged in vast lots, ready for shipment. He'd seen American industrial reports before. Always impressive, always excessive. But this was different. This was mobilization. "They cannot sustain it," Yamamoto said quietly. "No nation can convert an entire economy to war production in 18 months. Sato hesitated. "Sir, their automotive industry already exists at scale. They are not building capacity. They are redirecting it." Yamamoto set down the photographs. Outside, Tokyo's streets hummed with their own war preparations. Citizens rationing, factories running triple shifts, the empire stretching itself thin across the Pacific, gambling everything on speed and surprise. "Let them build," Yamamoto said finally. "Machines do not win wars, soldiers do." But as he spoke, he looked again at the photographs, at the endless rows of jeeps, at the factories that could produce them faster than his forces could destroy them. And for the first time since Pearl Harbor, Commander Takeshi Yamamoto felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Doubt. January 14th, 1942. Detroit, Michigan. Ford River Rouge Complex. The snow fell in thick curtains outside, but inside the River Rouge plant, the temperature hovered near 90 degrees. Captain William Knudsen, former General Motors president, now director of the Office of Production Management, walked the assembly line with the bearing of a man inspecting troops before battle. His polished shoes clicked against the concrete floor, echoing beneath the hammer of presses that could shape steel like clay. Behind him, Army procurement officers took notes on clipboards, their faces slick with sweat. 72 jeeps per day, Knudsen said, his Danish accent clipping the words short. "That's our current output. By April, we'll hit 120. By summer, 200. "Is that possible?" The lieutenant asking wore a fresh uniform, and doubt in equal measure. Knudsen stopped walking, turned, fixed the young officer with eyes that had overseen the production of 10 million automobiles before the war. "Son, in 1929, this plant produced one complete automobile every 49 seconds. Every 49 seconds. We built 15 million Model A's in 4 years. He gestured toward the line, where workers swarmed over Jeep frames like organized bees. "You're asking if it's possible to build 200 simple trucks per day?" The lieutenant said nothing. "The question isn't capability," Knudsen continued, walking again. "The question is willpower. And let me tell you something about American willpower." He led them to a side door, pushed it open into the frozen morning. Beyond, stretching toward the Detroit River, sat 10 acres of staging ground packed solid with completed Jeeps, thousands of them, olive-drab paint still fresh, each one tagged, numbered, and ready for rail transport. "That's 3 weeks of production," Knudsen said, "and it's just one plant." The officers stared. Willys in Toledo, Bantam in Butler, Ford here in Michigan. We've got a dozen facilities converting to military production. Every factory that used to build Fords and Chevrolets is now building trucks, Jeeps, engines, and parts. We're not changing what we do, we're changing what we make. A whistle blew. Below, a train crawled into the loading yard. Flat cars empty and waiting. The Japanese think they can outfight us, Knudsen said quietly. They're probably right. Man for man, their soldiers are experienced, disciplined, and prepared to die. Our boys are farmers and shopkeepers. Most of them never held a rifle before basic training. He turned back toward the factory, where the assembly line thunder continued without pause. But wars aren't won by soldiers alone. They're won by logistics, by supply chains, by the ability to put more bullets, more bombs, and more vehicles into the field than the enemy can destroy. He smiled, a cold, calculating expression. And America, gentlemen, is very good at making things. Inside, the line had evolved into something almost beautiful in its efficiency. Station 1. Chassis frames dropped from overhead conveyors, guided by workers in leather gloves. Station 2. Front and rear axles bolted into place with pneumatic wrenches, each taking 45 seconds. Station 3. Engine blocks, pre-assembled in a separate building, lowered into the frame like organs into a body. Station 4. Transmission, transfer case, and drive shaft connected in a choreographed dance of tools and hands. Station 5. Electrical systems wired through pre-drilled channels, every connection color-coded and foolproof. Station 6. Body panels, hood, fenders, grille, attached with speed bolts that required no welding. Station 7. Wheels mounted, fluids filled, seats installed. Station 8. Test drive through an interior track, checking steering, brakes, and engine performance. Station 9. Paint booth, olive drab applied in a single coat, flash-dried with heat lamps. Station 10. Final inspection, Army acceptance stamp, and roll-off to the staging yard. Start to finish, 97 minutes per vehicle. Mary Kaczmarek worked Station 4. Before the war, she'd been a seamstress on Michigan Avenue, making dresses for women who could afford them. Now she wore coveralls and steel-toed boots, and her hands, once delicate with needles and thread, could torque a transmission bolt to exact Army specifications without checking the gauge. "Transfer case secure," she shouted over the noise, signaling the next worker in line. The Jeep rolled forward. Another one took its place immediately. No gaps, no delays, no time to think about anything except the next bolt, the next connection, the next vehicle. At lunch, she sat in the break room with 17 other women, all of them new to factory work, all of them essential. They ate sandwiches and drank weak coffee while the factory hummed around them like a living thing. "My brother's in North Africa," said a woman named Helen. "Wrote me last week. Says they're using Jeeps for everything. Ammunition runs, reconnaissance, medical transport. He called it the backbone of the whole operation." Mary thought about that. The backbone. Every Jeep she built carried someone's brother, someone's son, someone's husband. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like purpose. She finished her sandwich and went back to the line. Across the Pacific, on the island of Rabaul, Japanese logistics officer Major Hiroshi Tanaka sat in a humid tent, reviewing supply manifests by candlelight. His forces had swept through the Philippines, Malaya, and the Dutch East Indies with shocking speed. Victory after victory, territory claimed, resources secured. But now, 3 months into occupation, the cracks were showing. "We need trucks," his aide reported. "The road to Kokoda is impassable without motorized transport." Tanaka rubbed his eyes. "Request denied. All available vehicles are committed to Guadalcanal." Then request more from Tokyo. Tokyo has no more to give. Tanaka looked up at the younger officer. Do you understand what you're asking? Japan produced 18,000 trucks last year, total, for the entire empire. And the Americans? Tanaka didn't answer immediately. He'd seen the intelligence reports. The numbers that seemed impossible, fantastical, surely exaggerated by enemy propaganda. The Americans, he said slowly, produced 5 million civilian vehicles in 1941. In 1 year, more than we've built in a decade. The aide stared. That cannot be accurate. It is. Tanaka returned to his manifests. Which is why we must win quickly. We cannot match their production. We can only outfight them before their factories turn the tide. Outside, the jungle pressed close, alive with insects and heat. Somewhere in the darkness, American forces dug in, supplied by ships, planes, and jeeps that arrived faster than they could be destroyed. Tanaka worked through the night, dividing resources that were already insufficient, calculating logistics for an empire stretched too thin. And in the back of his mind, a single thought repeated: we are racing against an assembly line. In Detroit, the line never stopped. August 3, 1942. Washington, D.C. War Production Board. The conference room smelled of cigarette smoke and desperation. General Leslie Groves stood at the head of a table cluttered with production charts, shipping manifests, and casualty reports. Around him sat 24 men representing every branch of military procurement, their faces drawn from months of 18-hour days and impossible demands. Gentlemen, Groves began, his voice like gravel, we have a mathematics problem. He tapped a chart showing Jeep production numbers. The line climbed steadily upward. 30,000 units produced since Pearl Harbor, with output accelerating every month. We're winning the production war, Groves continued. Our factories are outbuilding the enemy 10-1, 20-1 in some categories. He paused, letting that sink in. So why are we losing in the Pacific? Silence answered him. I'll tell you why. Groves pointed to a second chart, this one showing shipping losses. Red marks indicated sunken cargo vessels. There were dozens of them. Japanese submarines and aircraft are sending our supplies to the bottom of the ocean faster than we can replace them. We're building jeeps in Detroit, but they're not reaching Guadalcanal. A Navy commander leaned forward. Our convoy system is insufficient. Groves cut him off. We need a different approach. The Army wants 50,000 jeeps in the Pacific by December. At current shipping rates, accounting for losses, we'll deliver maybe 30,000. Maybe. Then we build more ships, someone suggested. We're already building more ships. Liberty ships. One every 42 days. But ships take time. Jeeps don't. Groves lit a cigarette, inhaled deeply. What if we changed the equation? How? By making the jeeps themselves part of the solution. He gestured to an aide who unfurled engineering blueprints across the table. We're developing amphibious variants. Jeeps that can drive off landing craft directly onto beaches. No dock infrastructure needed. No vulnerable supply depots. Just vehicle, water, land, combat. The room stirred with interest. Additionally, Groves continued, we're standardizing every component across all manufacturers. A Willys engine fits a Ford chassis. A Bantam transmission works in a Toledo-built frame. If a Jeep breaks down in New Guinea, any part from any factory can fix it. We're not just building vehicles, we're building an interchangeable system. Colonel James Hartford, Army Corps of Engineers, studied the blueprints. This level of standardization, it's unprecedented. So is this war, Groves replied. In the Solomon Islands, the arithmetic of war played out in mud and blood. Corporal Eddie Vasquez crouched behind his jeep, rain hammering the canvas roof while Japanese mortars walked toward his position. The vehicle shook with each impact, mud geysering around the tires. "We gotta move!" his driver, Private Kowalski, shouted over the explosions. "Wait for the gap!" Vasquez gripped his rifle, counting seconds between impacts. Mortars fired in patterns. You just had to read them. 1, 2, 3, now! Kowalski floored the accelerator. The Jeep lurched forward, engine screaming, tires clawing through knee-deep mud. Behind them, mortar fire obliterated the position they'd occupied seconds before. The Jeep fishtailed around a corner, splashed through a stream, and skidded into a clearing where American forces had established a temporary command post. Tents sagged under rain. Men moved like ghosts through the downpour. Vasquez jumped out, boots sinking into mud. "Medical supplies," he shouted to the sergeant who jogged over. 3 crates of morphine, bandages, and plasma. Where do you want them?" "Hospital tent, 200 yards east." The sergeant glanced at the Jeep, mud-caked, dented, bullet holes stitching the passenger door. "That thing still runs?" "Like a dream," Kowalski said, patting the hood. "Took shrapnel yesterday. Changed the oil, swapped a tire, and she's good as new." The sergeant shook his head in wonder. "How many miles on that odometer?" "Stopped counting at 5,000. 5,000 miles through jungle, swamp, and combat." The Jeep had carried ammunition to the front, evacuated wounded to the rear, towed artillery through mud that swallowed trucks twice its size. It had been shot, shelled, submerged, and set on fire, and it still ran. "American engineering," the sergeant muttered, almost reverently. Vasquez and Kowalski unloaded the supplies, then climbed back into their battered chariot. The engine turned over on the first try. "Where to next?" Kowalski asked. Vasquez consulted a rain-soaked map. "Ammo dump 3 miles north. They're expecting 50 crates of .30 caliber." "In this weather?" "Especially in this weather." Vasquez folded the map. "Nobody else can get through." The Jeep rolled forward into the storm. In Tokyo, the arithmetic looked different. Fleet Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto stood on the deck of the battleship Yamato, watching his fleet prepare for operations in the South Pacific. The most powerful navy in the Pacific, the pride of the empire. And yet, his chief of staff, Rear Admiral Matoma Yogaki, approached with a decoded intelligence report. "Sir, American vehicle production has exceeded 45,000 units." Yamamoto didn't turn. "Total?" "Since January, sir. They're producing at a rate that suggests they'll reach 50,000 before the year ends." Yamamoto closed his eyes. 50,000. More vehicles than Japan could produce in 5 years. And that was just one category. The Americans were also building tanks, aircraft, ships, everything, everywhere, all at once. "Our supply lines?" he asked quietly. Ugaki hesitated. "Strained, sir. The army in New Guinea is operating on minimal rations. Fuel shortages are affecting air operations. We've lost 17 cargo vessels in the last month." "And replacement production?" 3 vessels completed. 2 more under construction. 3 vessels to replace 17. The mathematics were brutal, undeniable, and terminal. "We're fighting an industrial colossus," Yamamoto said, eyes still closed. "Every battle we win costs us resources we cannot replace. Every battle they lose costs them resources they replace in a week." "Then we must strike harder, sir. Faster." "No." Yamamoto opened his eyes, staring at the endless ocean. "We must end this war before their production makes victory impossible." But even as he spoke, he knew it was already too late. The Americans had done the one thing Japan couldn't counter. They'd turned their entire civilization into a weapons factory. Back in Detroit, The night shift took over at 6 p.m. The line never stopped. Not for darkness, not for fatigue, not for anything. Workers came and went in 12-hour rotations, but the jeeps kept rolling. One every 97 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mary Kaczmarek worked her station with the precision of a surgeon. Bolt, wrench, torque, check, repeat. Each jeep identical to the last. Each one different only in the serial number stamped on its frame. She thought about the soldiers who'd drive them. Faces she'd never see. Names she'd never know. Lives depending on the integrity of every bolt she tightened. Every connection she secured. The weight should have crushed her. Instead, it kept her moving. February 18, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. Lieutenant Thomas Harmon gripped the steering wheel as the jeep bounced over rocky terrain, dust billowing behind like a sandstorm. Beside him, Staff Sergeant Ben Cooper clung to the mounted .50 caliber machine gun, scanning the ridgeline for German positions. "Contact left!" Cooper shouted. Harmon jerked the wheel. The jeep swerved behind a rock formation as machine gun fire chewed the ground where they'd been seconds before. The engine never faltered, just kept roaring, kept responding, kept moving. "We need to flank them," Harmon yelled over the gunfire. "Through that?" Cooper pointed at a boulder field that looked impassable. Harmon downshifted, locked the differential, and aimed straight into it. The jeep climbed, tires finding purchase on stones that would have stopped anything heavier. It bounced, lurched, and clawed forward like a mountain goat with an engine. They crested a ridge overlooking the German machine gun nest. Cooper opened fire. The .50 caliber thundered, brass casings ejecting in golden arcs. Below, German soldiers scrambled for cover as American infantry, following the jeep's path, surged forward. The nest fell in 90 seconds. Harmon sat behind the wheel, hands shaking, lungs heaving. The jeep idled beneath him, engine ticking, ready for whatever came next. "You know what the Krauts call these things?" Cooper asked, feeding a new ammunition belt into the gun. "What?" "Unstoppable." Cooper grinned. "They're not wrong." Across North Africa, the story repeated itself 1,000 times over. Jeeps hauling wounded across minefields. Jeeps carrying officers to frontline command posts. Jeeps mounting radios that turned them into mobile communication centers. Jeeps pulling artillery pieces through sand that swallowed trucks. General George Patton stood atop his command jeep, binoculars raised, watching his armored divisions roll across the desert. Behind him, a column of vehicles stretched to the horizon. Tanks, half-tracks, trucks, and hundreds of jeeps, all moving in coordinated formation. "How many vehicles in this operation?" he asked his aide. 8,000, sir. Roughly 1,200 are jeeps." Patton lowered the binoculars. "The jeep is the most valuable piece of equipment in this war. Give me enough jeeps and I'll conquer Europe." It wasn't hyperbole. In the ruthless arithmetic of mechanized warfare, mobility equaled victory, and nothing moved like a jeep. Back in the United States, the production numbers told their own story. By March 1943, total jeep production crossed 50,000 units, exactly as projected. But the factories didn't slow down. They accelerated. Ford River Rouge, 212 units per day. Willis Toledo, 196 units per day. Smaller contractors adding another 100 combined. 500 jeeps per day. 15,000 per month. More vehicles produced in a single month than Japan's entire automotive industry could build in a year. Captain William Knudsen walked the Detroit assembly line on March 7th, conducting one of his regular inspections. Beside him, a British military attaché named Colonel Reginald Hayes observed the operation with barely concealed awe. "How many workers?" Hayes asked. "This plant? 3,200 on day shift, same number at night, 6,400 total. And they can all perform every task? Most of them, yes. We cross-train extensively. If someone's sick or injured, another worker steps in. The line never stops. Hayes watched a Jeep roll past, fresh paint gleaming under fluorescent lights. Do you know what Churchill said when we showed him production figures? What? He said, "Gentlemen, we cannot lose this war. The Americans have weaponized their economy." Knudsen smiled grimly. He's not wrong, but it cost us. Cost. Civilian production has nearly ceased. No new cars, no appliances, no luxury goods. Everything, steel, rubber, aluminum, fuel, goes to the war. We've rationed gasoline, coffee, sugar, meat. The entire nation is on a wartime footing. Is there resentment? Some. Knudsen gestured toward the workers on the line. Men and women, black and white, young and old, all working in synchronized purpose. But mostly, there's resolve. Everyone knows someone in uniform. Everyone's contributing. He led Hayes to a wall where workers had posted photographs of soldiers, sailors, and Marines. Hundreds of faces, each one connected to someone on the factory floor. That's why the line never stops, Knudsen said quietly. Every Jeep carries someone's son home. In the Pacific, that truth played out daily. Corporal Vasquez, now a sergeant, sat in his Jeep on the beach at Guadalcanal, watching supply ships unload on the distant horizon. Beside him, his original driver Kowalski cleaned the vehicle's engine, their third since landing 9 months ago. You ever think about how many of these things they built? Kowalski asked, wiping oil from a carburetor. Someone told me 50,000. That's more Jeeps than people in my hometown. Vasquez laughed. It's more Jeeps than sense. But damn if they don't work. Their current vehicle had been assembled in Toledo 6 months earlier. It had survived 3 combat operations, 2 ambushes, 1 fire, and countless miles of jungle roads that barely qualified as roads. The odometer showed 8,000 miles. The engine still purred. Think we'll make it home in this thing? Kowalski asked. Vasquez patted the hood. Brother, if this Jeep can survive the Pacific, it can survive anything. In Tokyo, survival meant something different. Major Tanaka sat in a drafty office, reviewing supply reports that bordered on catastrophic. The Empire's logistics network, stretched across thousands of miles of ocean, was collapsing under its own weight. Vehicle losses in the Pacific, 437 units. Replacement production, 18 units. Fuel shortages, critical. Rubber shortages, severe. Steel allocations, diverted to naval construction. The mathematics were inescapable. For every resource Japan committed to the war, America committed 10. For every vehicle Japan lost, America built 50 more. We're being buried under their industrial capacity, Tanaka told his aide. Our soldiers are fighting machines. Their machines are fighting our soldiers. Can we win, sir? Tanaka looked at the map on his wall. The Empire's territory marked in red, slowly shrinking as American forces island-hopped closer to Japan itself. Win? He shook his head. No. But perhaps we can negotiate peace before their factories make victory impossible. The aide started to respond, then fell silent. They both knew the truth. The factories had already made victory impossible. The only question left was how long Japan could survive the arithmetic of war. June 6, 1944. Normandy, France. Omaha Beach. The ramp dropped into hell. Private First Class Danny Morrison jumped from the landing craft into chest-deep water, bullets snapping past his head like angry hornets. Around him, men fell screaming or simply disappeared beneath the waves. The beach stretched ahead, 200 yards of open sand between him and survival. He ran. Somehow he made it to the seawall, collapsed against the concrete, lungs burning, ears ringing from artillery. Beside him, a dozen other soldiers pressed flat, pinned down by machine gun fire from the cliffs above. "We need transport," a lieutenant shouted, blood streaming from a head wound. "We're sitting ducks." Morrison looked back at the beach. Landing craft were unloading equipment now. Crates, ammunition, weapons, and jeeps. Waterproofed jeeps designed to drive through surf directly onto hostile shores. One of them rolled off a ramp into the water. The driver, a kid who looked about 19, kept the engine running as waves crashed over the hood. The jeep pushed forward, tires finding purchase on the sand, water streaming from every panel. It drove straight up the beach under fire. Morrison watched, stunned, as the jeep reached the seawall. The driver threw it into park, jumped out, and dove for cover. "Transport's here!" someone shouted. They loaded 3 wounded men into the jeep. Morrison climbed behind the wheel. He'd driven one in training, but never like this. Never under fire. Never with lives depending on every decision. He slammed the accelerator. The jeep roared backward, tires spinning in sand, then caught traction. Morrison spun the wheel, shifted gears, and raced toward the nearest aid station, following tire tracks that other jeeps had carved through the chaos. Machine gun fire stitched the sand beside him. Morrison kept driving. The wounded men in back groaned with every bounce, but alive was alive. He reached the aid station, a hasty collection of tents behind a ridge, and medics rushed to unload. Morrison sat behind the wheel, hands locked in a death grip, realizing he'd just driven through the worst day of the war. And the jeep hadn't hesitated once. "You good?" A sergeant appeared beside him. Morrison nodded, unable to speak. "Then get back to the beach. More wounded coming in." The sergeant tapped the hood. "This machine just saved 3 lives. Let's see how many more we can save." Morrison drove back into the inferno. By nightfall, Allied forces had established a foothold on Omaha Beach. Tenuous, bloody, but holding. And across that beachhead, jeeps moved like blood cells through arteries, carrying supplies forward, wounded back, officers to the front, ammunition to desperate positions. General Dwight Eisenhower stood on a bluff overlooking the beach, watching the controlled chaos below. His logistics chief, Lieutenant General John Lee, stood beside him with a clipboard. "How many vehicles ashore?" Eisenhower asked. "Approximately 4,000, sir. 30% are jeeps." "Losses?" "Significant, but replaceable." Lee consulted his notes. "We're unloading vehicles faster than we're losing them. By tomorrow, we'll have 8,000 ashore. By next week, 20,000. Eisenhower nodded. "The Germans can't match that." "No, sir. Their supply lines are collapsing. They're fighting with whatever they brought to the front. We're fighting with the entire industrial capacity of America." Below, another wave of landing craft hit the beach. More jeeps rolled off into the surf, driving through water and fire to deliver supplies that would keep the invasion alive. "You know what won this war?" Eisenhower said quietly. "What's that, sir?" "Detroit, Toledo, Pittsburgh. Every factory worker who stayed late, every engineer who solved production problems, every woman who stepped into a man's job and did it better. They won this war before the first shot was fired." Lee nodded. "The Germans built tanks. We built everything." "No." Eisenhower turned away from the beach. "We built victory, one jeep at a time." By the end of 1944, Allied forces had produced more than 640,000 military vehicles. Jeeps accounted for over 650,000 units, a number so staggering it defied comprehension. In Detroit, Mary Kaczmarek worked her final shift on December 23rd before taking rare Christmas leave. She stood at Station 4, installing the last transmission of her day, when the foreman walked over. "Kaczmarek, You've been here since 42, right? Yes, sir. Know how many Jeeps you've personally worked on? She'd never counted. Thousands. 18,462. He showed her the production log. Your station, your hands, that many vehicles. Probably saved 50,000 lives. Mary stared at the number. 18,000. It seemed impossible. She was just one worker on one line in one factory. But multiplied across every factory, every shift, every worker, the numbers became world-changing. We're winning, aren't we? She asked. The foreman smiled. We already won. The rest is just delivery. In Germany, the reality of that delivery became undeniable. Colonel Hans Weber, German Army logistics officer, sat in a frozen bunker outside Berlin, reviewing supply reports by candlelight. The numbers told a story of collapse. Available vehicles, 1,200 operational trucks for an entire army group. Fuel reserves, 3 days at current consumption. Replacement production, halted due to Allied bombing. American forces, by contrast, operated with unlimited mobility. Every division had its own motor pool. Every battalion had jeeps for reconnaissance, supply, and communication. They moved like water, flowing around resistance, overwhelming static defenses through pure logistical superiority. We're not fighting soldiers, Weber told his aide. We're fighting factories. Can we stop them? Weber looked at the maps showing Allied advances from all directions: France, Italy, the East. Armies moving faster than Germany could respond because they had vehicles, fuel, and spare parts in infinite supply. No, Weber said. We can only delay the inevitable. In the Pacific, the inevitable arrived on wheels. Sergeant Vasquez drove his Jeep through Manila's streets on February 3, 1945. American flags flying as Filipino civilians cheered from the sidewalks. Behind him, an entire column of vehicles rolled through the liberated city. Jeeps, trucks, tanks, half-tracks, all American-made, all unstoppable. Kowalski sat in the passenger seat. Older now, harder, but still alive. Remember when we landed on Guadalcanal? Vasquez asked. How Kowalski laughed. The sound rough, but warm. Yeah. Back then we carried everything on our backs. Now look at us. Feels like the whole country's pushing from behind. Vasquez steered around a crater, the Jeep bouncing lightly. Mary in Detroit probably built this thing, he said. People like her, they were with us the whole way. Kowalski nodded as crowds waved at their passing column. That's the difference, Sarge. They fought with rifles. We fought with an entire nation. The Jeep rolled on through Manila, sunlight catching its hood like a badge of victory. One built, shipped, and delivered.